Welcome to another episode of the Impossible Life Podcast. I'm your co-host, Nick Surface, and I'm looking across at a man so complete, he dragged his seal trident out of the birth canal to ensure there would be no more Unclebachs in his family. That's right, friends, the former Navy SEAL, Garrett Unclebach, a man whose only mistake was letting his sister be born first.
That's fine.
Is that accurate?
Like all of your intros, it's grounded in some truth.
So the great thing is we actually have the mother, the birther of said seal trident dragger.
I will say he did kind of come out like a ninja, so hey.
I'm going to get distracted very early on. So, gee, this is part 3 of our
We've
parenting
been,
series.
we've been doing this for over 150 episodes. We've been talking about this, alluding to it, not just in the last 3-part series, but for years now. And now we are finally here. I'm excited for this. We've had some incredible guests. We've had, some of my friends, New York Times bestsellers, Super Bowl winners, very successful people, all kinds of accomplishments. But I couldn't be more excited for today's guests, my parents.
I've only given a standing ovation to one other person. It was Pastor Keith. But I'm going to give you all a standing ovation because I love you guys. I think you're amazing. So yeah, why are you guys here, right? I mean, we're going to get into that in a second. Gee, I feel like we need to give bios of your parents, a little bit of background on them, because I know Scott Unclebach, a.k.a. Pops, and I know some things about him, but I feel like you should do that. And then your mom, Darlene, a.k.a. the vampire, because she literally doesn't age. Garrett will show me pictures of her from like 15 years ago. I'm like, wow, it's crazy. So why don't you give some bios, give a little bit of background about for the people that don't know your parents.
Yeah, just some impromptu bio for my parents, and then we'll have plenty of opportunity for them to talk about themselves. These are my parents, Scott and Darlene. They birthed me in 1990. Obviously, one of their greatest accomplishments. No, I'm just kidding. Just a couple quick things about my parents. One of the great privileges that I have is having 2 parents that have been married and stayed married. So Scott and Darlene are the parents of both me and my sister. My father, I get the privilege of doing construction with. He's my business partner. He's been a lifelong builder, entrepreneur in many areas and categories of his life. My father would tell you some of his greatest accomplishments are his marriage, his children, what we do at Elevate Life Church. And then my mother is a wizard of understanding people's emotional health and physical health. That's some of her greatest accomplishments that she does today. My mom would say the same. Some of her greatest accomplishments are her children and the relationships that she has in life. And she's been someone who's spoken into me. I talk about my dad a lot, but my mom has spoken into me since I was a little boy. And my mom, would tell me stories of how even when she was pregnant with me, not only did she speak over me, but other people spoke over me. So I have 2 incredible parents that helped raise me, speak identity and purpose into me. And we're going to hear about some of that today. And I know you have, as much as you know my parents, Nick, I know you have a lot of questions for them as well.
100%. So. Yeah, like 45 of them were embarrassing stories about you that I had to strike out. So I'm going to go ahead and be professional today. Hey, welcome. You guys haven't spoken yet. Welcome, Scott and Darlene. You want to say hi?
Well, hello. I am so excited and very honored to be here, and I absolutely will come into agreement. My children are some of my greatest fruits, for sure.
Yeah, They're amazing.
And my parents are also listeners of the podcast. Which is
I was going to say, as the father, you listen to your son, and I look at it or listen to it through a different set of eyes.
Yeah.
And I am a avid listener. And as you guys know, I give you feedback, unsolicited.
Shocker, yeah.
And just love the show, and it's provides me great wisdom. It's always amazing to me to hear the mix that's in Garrett. Obviously, some of it's from our parenting, some of it's from Pastor Keith on the spiritual side, and then what the Navy SEALs mixed in. It's quite a combination. And I hear things from him all the time that I've never heard before.
Yeah, we have to listen to the show so we can learn some things that happened in his career, because he didn't want to talk about himself and share about all those things. So we get to hear some of the little things that come out. I'll ask him, I'll go, did you know that? He's like, no, first time I ever heard that.
No, and I bust him about it. Say, hey, what's the deal? I'm your dad.
Yeah, for real. Well, I think it's funny that you said those 3 things, because I was talking to somebody recently when we were at the F1 event that didn't know Garrett, and I was like, what you need to understand about him is there's 3 inputs into him that you'll see various sides of, and the more I've gotten to know him and be around you guys, and then obviously be around Pastor Keith, and then the other stuff I can pick up from the seals because that's usually the most rough and abrasive side. You can, but it really is like it's a very unique quality of the ingredients, and so it's fun. And I think one of my joys is his friend, and I'm very close. I'm saying this up front because we'll get into this, but I'm very close with your daughter as well. Like they're two of our two best couple friends are basically your kids, and they're spouses, and it's interesting for me because as I've gotten to be around you more, Darlene, like, you know, I've heard Garrett talk about my dad, and then I'll see things in you and I'm like, oh my gosh, like Garrett hammers me the way his dad hammers him. And then I've seen some things in you, like, and I'm like, Darlene has the same level of focus and like mission focus that Garrett does. Like I used to joke that like for the first 6 months I knew you, I'd say, hi Darlene, you just walk by me because you were focused on something else. I'm like, where else do I see that? Oh yeah, every time I come to Garrett's house, and like he doesn't acknowledge that I'm there until it's like, we're doing whatever we're doing. There's no hi. It's just like, oh, all right, we're doing this. Okay, I guess we're moving. Yeah, sure. So it's just funny to see that. All right, so let's get into it because this is part 3. Man, having Dr. Robbie on last week, I've had multiple people text since that's come out. And it just, I know for me, I've listened to it. What a gift he is, man. And he pulled some things that we're going to get into. But the reason we wanted to have y'all on here, so obviously Garrett's a credit to you guys, and so is your daughter. And people get to see that in Garrett, and he gives you so much credit. But I really want, like, I'm always fascinated. We really only will rise to the level that we see, right? Pastor Keith said, like, a man will never rise above the way he sees himself. So much of that in our life is the same way. Like, we always say you thought you were an athlete till you met an athlete, right? Because you can be the small or the big fish in a small pond. Same thing for parenting. You think you're a great parent if you've only ever seen bad parenting.
It's maybe your idea of parenting is, you know, I kept my kids out of jail and they finished school.
Right. And then you see someone and you're like, oh, that was possible. So that's why we have you guys. I mean, it's the impossible life. We want people to be able to see. So I just want to dive in because Garrett has amazing parents. I have amazing, loving parents. They're still together. You know, they gave us so much of the faith and we're both very blessed. But like we talk about how important that example is. What were your parents like growing up for each of y'all?
I will tell you, when I was growing up, my parents didn't know the Lord. So I was the first one in the family at the age of 5 that came to know God. And faith is a real big deal in our family. And that really has shaped us, shaped our marriage, shaped the way we parent and all of those things. So I didn't come from that. So I will tell you, there was quite a bit of dysfunction in my family. So my parents were not a good role model for marriage or parenting. And so I had to learn from other people.
Yeah. And you're putting that mildly because when you say dysfunction, and I'm not asking you to share the details, but it wasn't like...
Well, I just like not to get in all the weeds of it. My parents have passed and, you know, we ended well. Everything was good. But I will tell you, I'll just even being really real, I was not emotionally connected with my parents. You know, they did the best they knew how. They just did not know how to parent. They had a lot of stuff that they were dealing with. You know, I would say my mom probably had mental health issues, to put it mildly, right? So,
and she came from trauma.
Yes, exactly. And so, you know, moving forward, it's like as an adult, you try to be the best you can in that situation because I had a better understanding than she did. So I felt like many times I'm trying to be I'm the one that's the adult in the room, right? Mm-hmm. So there wasn't that emotional connection, but there was still honor there. Right. I wouldn't
Mom,
say.
I think a lot of people go through that.
Yeah.
And where do you think that shift was for you in your life where you kind of realized like, man, my parents are, because of what they went through, because of what they know, they're probably not going to change. I need to change. And I remember, you know, thinking back, I remember some of that where, you know, it was like you'd be frustrated by conversations that you had with your mom. And as time went on, you just realized like she's not going to change, but I need to change. What would you say to people who are kind of in that same boat?
I will tell you, as much as anything, probably in my younger years and up until, you know, I had kids and y'all were a little older, there was a sense of, I felt a responsibility to my parents. So I was probably the peacemaker and just always trying to organize everything, making sure, you know, holidays, get-togethers. I was the one that would be putting all of that stuff together. But the shift for me came probably, my mother had a very bad behavior in front of my kids, in front of my daughter, Brittany was probably about 7 years old. And that was probably in a moment, I had a voice for the first time to my parents. And it was actually to my mom because she was getting ready to hit my dad. And something just rose up in me, and I'll just say it how I said it. I said, this is not how we operate here in the Unclebach house, and you can take that bad behavior and take it out my back door, and don't you ever bring it back in my house again. It's kind of strong, isn't it?
Yes.
And immediately there was a quietness. She just sat down. She had never been addressed like that ever before. She just kind of ran the roost and all of that. And it made a shift in our relationship. Like I tried to make peace with it, and, we kind of talked about it, but there was definitely a shift there. And there was a shift there where, honestly, for me, it's like I, wanted to honor my parents, but more than there was the mother bear that came out in me to protect my kids. And suddenly I saw, the behaviors, I guess, through my children's eyes, and I never wanted my kids to experience that again. So it's what I call healthy boundaries. Yeah. And so when we did that, and I'd go see my parents, meet with my parents. I just knew I kind of had a rule of it's a 3-hour kind of relationship, because we could kind of keep everything, on the surface. Yeah. And didn't, because my parents weren't gonna, because there had been an opportunity where me and my siblings had tried to have a conversation, kind of an intervention with my mom in a very light and kind of happy way. And she did not want to go there. So we never traveled down that road again with my mom. So we just kind of did the dance, just kind of loved them kind of where they were, and just kind of respect and honor. But we still had healthy boundaries. I no longer felt like I was the one that had to be responsible for their happiness and making sure everything was okay and all of that. Suddenly, there was just a shift that took place.
And I think that from what you said, that shift and that responsibility came out of, growing up, before you ever had kids, you felt like you had a responsibility to your parents, but then realizing, hey, my responsibility is to my children, and that becoming the priority really changed the way that you led that relationship.
Yeah.
Bob, same thing for you. What was your?
Yeah, well, my case was a little bit different than Darlene's. My mother was very sweet and loving, and so if I think about my childhood, I think that my mom was there and for me. As much as she could be. My dad was a typical 60s speak when spoken to father, strong type A personality, executive, company executive. And our communication was basically him disciplining me, and that was it. Right. So I didn't like my dad. I certainly didn't love my dad, and I told him so as I got older. And I remember one day on the way to school, I told him, I think I was 12 or 13 years old, he was taking me to school, and I told him that he didn't know who I was. He wasn't involved in my life in any, and I didn't want to have, I told him, I don't want to have anything to do with you. And, I was a typical kid in school. I was a good athlete, not a great athlete, but I was involved in all the sports and played, and did really well in school. Always excelled in school, made straight A's. And didn't cause any, problems. I was, class president and involved in all the civic stuff, and just a good kid. Yeah. I mean, as a parent, you think, oh, this is a good kid. But I had a middle brother who was a disaster, and still is. And it's sad. I mean, we want him to be his best and pray, but he jumped off the ledge and ran away from God at about 12 or 13, and it never came back. Yeah. And so my parents spent all their time managing that problem, expulsions, drugs, fights, just anything you can imagine, getting arrested, They dealt with the whole deal. So my older brother and I were pretty much non-existent because we just did the things that we were supposed to do, and we served God and went to church and had a life. But my dad was, I always say this, my dad was an example of exactly what I didn't want to be. I knew early on that I did not want to be that type of father. Yeah. And so I took from his ways, and I just said I'm going to be different. Now, fortunately, my dad got saved when I was in high school, and he became a different person. It took about a decade for it to really soften him up and change him. And to his credit, he came to me after I graduated high school, and he said, "Look, I haven't been a good father," and he said, "But I'm going to be a good grandfather."
That's cool.
And so, I can respect that. He became a great man of God and really got into reading the Word of God and became a steward of it, and a real prayer warrior, and just a great
And
guy.
was highly involved in prison ministry.
He started the prison ministry in our area. Actually, when my dad passed unexpectedly, very young at 62, they flew the flag over the Capitol in the state of Texas in his honor.
Oh, wow.
For what he had done in the prison ministries. So
That's cool.
So it's a tale of two different stories, right? So my youth was not good. My dad didn't come to any game. I never saw him at any of my sporting events. My mom would come occasionally, but most of the time I had no parents at the events. And I don't know how that drove me, but I just didn't really let it faze me. I just said, I'm going to achieve and go forward. And I was an entrepreneur as a young man and just went forward and just didn't let it shape me. That my dad wasn't involved in my life. So, again, like you said, neither one of us had great parenting.
No.
And I'm sympathetic to people that have challenges with their families. But when we get married and we became one, we decided to move forward. And
Right.
we sought out some people that we could model, which was Pastors Keith and Sheila, and find someone to follow and live a healthy marriage and create a great life. And that's what we focused on. And we were in our early 20s when we started that journey.
Yeah.
And so it's two different things with my dad. I think of my dad wonderfully at his death. I mean, we had a relationship and we were friends, but I didn't see him as there was no tenderness. Like I
Right.
didn't have like a warmth for my father and that you normally would, And so I knew when Garrett was born, well, Brittany too, but I wanted it to be different.
Yeah.
And my dad didn't do anything with me. I grabbed hold of Garrett when he was about 5 or 6, and he did everything with me.
Yeah.
And as inconvenient as that is.
Yeah. Sorry, Pops. Go ahead.
No, it's just, when you decide to take a child with you everywhere you go,
Yeah.
or whatever you're doing, it's going to take longer and it's going to be more effort.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of work to have great kids.
It is
Yeah,
a lot
no
of work
kidding.
to have great kids.
So you guys both knew that you didn't want to be like your parents, but it's one thing to know what you don't want to do. But you said, so you identified it in Pastor Keith and Sheila. Was there anybody else, or were they the ones that you really looked at for role models as far as for parents?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really have anybody else at that time.
No, and in that season of our life too, they didn't even live in our area. They were in Washington, I believe, when Josh was born. So Pastor Josh, his son, and my daughter are 2 months apart. And then Garrett and their youngest are 2 months apart.
Right.
And then Pastor Sheila got crazy and had one in the middle. So we kind of rode that out together. But there were I would tell you, there were some life principles that Pastor Keith and Sheila passed down to us that transferred over into parenting that before. Because we weren't, like I said, we weren't with them all the time to watch how they parented, but there were life principles that they passed our way that's what bled into parenting.
Do you remember what any of those were?
Not necessarily specifically, but, as much as anything, I would tell you, we knew pretty fast, like what our mission was and, core values and stuff. And I felt very strong about not having 5,000 rules for my kids, to rule out of, parent out of character.
Right.
And not out of rules,
Right.
and, it's like simple things of that wasn't very honoring when you did that to your sister or, whatever that was. Things like that. That's how we would parent. And we were also big believers in not I can tell you there were some seasons in my life. It was just, that mother in you. That I was a bit of a helicopter parent. God delivered me from that.
Man, when I think about, honestly, it's continually revelational to me when I think about you guys parenting me, especially as I got older as a teenager. Like I have a lot of trust in God with my kids today, but still there's just, danger is a reality for your children. And you guys witnessed me do some of the craziest stuff. And I've talked about a lot how you guys would tell me God has a plan for your life. And as I'm starting to say that for my own children, I never realized this until I say it over my own children, that part of you guys saying that to me, it was for me, but it was also for you. It's a statement of like, when I say to my daughters, God has a plan for your life, that's for them, but it's also reminding me God has a plan for them. I don't have to control it.
Yeah.
If I think it's my job to keep them from getting hurt, obviously I have to be a parent, but it's not my job to protect them from everything. When I say God has a plan for their life, it's for them, but it's also a reminder for me, God has a plan for them.
Well, the deal for me was, early on, I learned they're not my children. They're God's kids, and God's given them to me to steward. And I am going to be the one that answers to how I parented my kids, yes, but I'm here to steward them and direct them. And, my mission, as much as anything, we can go back to that later, but, I chose to stay at home and be with my kids. I thought with Brittany, after she was born, I thought I'd kind of go back to my career. I put her in daycare for about 30 minutes, went back in. They were not taking care of her the way I thought they should. Picked her up, left, and never revisited that again. And because I knew I wanted to be home, because my mission really was to equip, empower, and encourage my children to be all that they're called to be for God. So I knew that very early. So it was like I got to be there 24/7.
I don't have one memory in my life where you weren't available to me. Right. There are times where Dad's traveling for work or whatever, and Pops and I have so many memories, but I have no memory in my life where I couldn't just go to my mom. And that's because you made us the priority. You didn't say well, I'm here for you, but then, these times a day or whenever I'm doing other things. I have no memories of you not being available for us.
One of the things, to answer your question that Darlene started, that I saw in the crafts. So at that time, Keith was traveling about 40 to 45 weeks a year as an evangelist and was gone. And one thing that I noticed is how intentional they were with their kids to make the most of the time. And they did a really good job of that. And I think that's a picture we saw. And Sheila was wonderful with the kids. She was a kindergarten teacher before she started having babies. And when she had babies, she became a stay-at-home mom. And you can imagine with 3 kids and your husband traveling 4 to 5 days a week, it was a difficult season. And how they managed that very positively, how the kids responded, how they handled travel when they all traveled together. And so that was one of the things we picked up from that. And Darlene, again, she wasn't modeled it from anyone, but she knew what she wanted. And we as a couple wanted her to stay home. And so we figured out how to make that happen, which is challenging in any society. It's even harder now with the cost of living and what it is. But as much as Darlene might have been a helicopter parent, I was probably the opposite. I was pretty aggressive as a child, and I BMX'd and did a lot of crazy stuff. And so when Garrett got old enough to start doing crazy stuff, I'm encouraging it. We can build a ramp, or we could, do.
All the kids on my street, we all did, skateboarding and rollerblading and BMX. And my house had all the tools. My dad's the contractor, so we're always building ramps in the driveway.
So, but I want to say something.
He created the adventure.
Yeah. I think it's important for, and Garrett and I talk about this in the upcoming book that we have coming out. Parents are so soft on their children nowadays.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if it's a boy or girl. They need to get bumps and bruises. They need to get out of the house, enjoy nature, do crazy stuff. They're going to get
hospital visits.
They're going to get cuts and bruises. It's just part of growing up. It's part of adventure. It's a part of life. We laugh all the time that Garrett was never really sick, but he did have to go to the emergency room quite often.
Yeah.
of course, we never want him to be in the emergency room or break bones or whatever, but I wanted my children to enjoy themselves.
It's worth a few $1,000s of emergency room visits for your child to, have courage and drive and get out there and do things.
Well, and to conquer fear.
Yeah.
Face it.
Playing video games has some wonderful attributes to it, and I can only say that now because Garrett can say that.
Yeah.
I used to question that when he was a teenager.
He's adamant about defending video gamers. It's an odd thing.
But it has to be
It
balanced.
can't be solely. Yeah.
Yeah, it has to be balanced.
Right.
And I would encourage all the parents that listen to this to just take the gloves off, man. Take off the bumper rails at the bowling alley. Let these kids make a way. There's winners and there's losers in life. There's people that are going to be better at you at everything you do. And you got to be able to deal with that. Maybe sometimes you'll be the best, but there's only one best at whatever it is. And I can't beat Scotty Scheffler at golf, but it doesn't mean I don't want to try. On my day, maybe I can one day,
Yeah.
And so I just want to encourage parents to just know it's okay. Let your kids have fun. Boys are I was talking to one of our employees yesterday, and his son was screaming in the background, not like in pain, but he was just screaming. And I said,
understands.
I said, I want you to go tell him that boys growl, they don't scream.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, that's good. And I really agree with that. Boys are supposed to make noises.
Yeah.
They're supposed to growl and make noises and run and do all the things that they do. And so, anyway, I just think that's an important thing. I see so many kids that have never done anything. They're just they're fragile.
Yeah.
And that's not helping your children.
Yeah.
Well, overall, we really came to an agreement where we parented our kids. Yes, there were healthy boundaries or whatever, but we did give our kids like some rope to possibly hang themselves with.
Right.
Because we didn't want to because we had the philosophy, it is better, listen, we're all human. Even as adults, we're going to make mistakes, right? And kids are going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And it is so important to allow your children to make mistakes while they're under your roof so they can understand how to resolve that, how to get through a conflict and how to overcome it instead of waiting for their first conflict to be when they're away at college and they don't have parents close to speak into their life and help them through a conflict.
I know this is a squirrel branch, but it just seems appropriate in saying that. I mean, I abhor participation trophies.
Oh, yeah. Not going to offend anybody here.
It doesn't help anyone. It doesn't teach your kids about winning and losing. It doesn't teach your kids about trying hard. You're not always going to win, but you should always want to win, and you should always try hard to win. And it's not about being a winner. It's just about being excellent in what you do. I didn't care if Garrett lost or Brittany lost a sporting event as long as they were giving it their best. That's what I expected. And if I was going to have a discussion with my children, not at the baseball game or basketball game or football game, in private, father to child, I would say, you didn't give your best today.
Yeah.
And I would talk to them about that and say, we always want to give our best.
I think if you kind of, because like what's the right philosophy, what's the right principle that governs this is stewardship, right? That's where God looks at all of us. And I think if you take that element and you put it into like kids sports, for example, like your son's baseball team could win, but maybe he was being a doofus, right? And you'd be like, hey, look, your team won, but like you didn't be your best today.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, the team can lose, but you can be proud of your performance, right? And that's really just saying, what did I do with what I was given? And teaching sports is a way that you can teach that to children, right? There's going to be times in life where it's like, man, I did all I could in business and I still failed, right? And so what did I do with what I was given?
Yeah. And it's just my job as the host of this conversation to make sure that I'm pulling out some of the consistencies. And I'm going to ask you to repeat something here in a second, Darlene. So looking at trends, because what I don't want is for this to be theoretical. I want people to come away with handles. You heard some things from Dr. Robbie that, whoa, shocker, you guys did them, even though you didn't have a Dr. Robbie to tell you. First thing Darlene said was to have a stewardship mentality, right? And you said you had a mission, you had core values, and I'm sure you can hear it from Scott. Scott was you were very consistent. I remember one time I told somebody, I said, look, when Garrett got to the teams, seeing unmoving standards was not new to him. It just probably had a little bit more severe consequence that was associated to it because you were so, like you just said about participation trophies. So like if you're out there, I mean, Pastor or Dr. Robbie talked about like the importance of mission, the importance of having core values. And he talked about how God's the perfect parent because he gives you a rule and a consequence. And he said you have to parent from a place of relationship, which Darlene, you said that. And like I said, you did these things without actually knowing them. And then we had a clinical psychologist to lay it out for us last week. I just want, I'm saying this for people out there so that they can recognize the trends. Can you say what that mission was again? Because you said you felt like you were there to...
I was called to empower, to equip, and to encourage my children to be all that God has called them to be.
I love that. What a great thought. If you could just take that thought process and work out some of these things in there, I think that would
It's
be...
actually, I have a vision.
Yeah.
I still have my vision board, a big, huge vision board. It's in the center. Okay, I've got this little center hub. I've got all these little pies of different things. And in the center, that is my mission statement, and, as a mother, especially when my kids were young, and even after, Garrett's off being a SEAL and conquering the world and all the things. I had a whole little pie about Garrett of all the things I'm believing for, praying for his wife, all the things, one for Brittany, all the things that I'm praying and believing for. But that was the center.
Hey, Mom, while
that.
we're just here for a second, I've and I'm not a lady and I'm not a mom, so I want you to speak to this, but I've heard it before. Some of like the pushback for moms is like, well, if I make my life all about that, then I'm going to miss out on what I get to do with my life. And also part of that is, well, what do I do after my kids, grow up? How does my mission change? Will you just kind of talk about that for a second?
Well, I think we have seasons in our life, right?
Yeah.
Because I absolutely know, who I am and who I belong to. And I know I'm not just a wife or a mother. I'm actually a daughter of the King, too. So I understand all of that. But I also understand as a woman and a mother, I was like the initial faith trainer with my kids. So I'm at home, because Scott's out conquering dragons and, providing for the family and doing all of those things. So I was like the gap filler of all of those things. And there was never like resentment about that at all. Like I knew my role. I was excited about my role. Right. And so there were seasons of that. And so as time went on, I will tell you probably, this probably ain't going to mean anything to your people, but like my responder was much higher when when my kids were younger, because it was all about, being with my kids, and my kids are young and I'm very emotionally connected to my kids. I'm totally involved in their life on all levels. But as time went on and now they're off doing their thing, now I'm definitely still a wife. I'm still a mother. Now I'm a grandmother. And so how exciting is that I get to even impart and be a faith trainer into my grandkids. I'm constantly looking for cool books and shows and things for them. My vision always is how for my grandbabies to be connected to God themselves and know who they are. So my brain is like things like that. But there are seasons of that, and there are seasons now. I'm a little bit more free because we're more empty nesters. So now I get to play.
We are.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. But I also get to be more active in my church and be a part of now. It's Lisa Bevere's got a great book that I love. It's called, it's like a godmother spirit. Now I get to speak into other mothers and help them with their children and speak into their lives and, pass that on forward. Because that's part of the legacy and our heritage of our life. It is, and it's something we really taught our kids a lot of, this doesn't sound really fun, but it's like our life is not our own.
Yeah.
We belong to the Lord. And in that piece of that, we're not just, our life isn't just about our kids. We have a responsibility to touch the people around us too. And that was a big thing even with our kids is, we can get to that later on what we thought the three things would be. that we had succeeded in parenting. But one of the things that was really important to us is that our kids knew how to serve other people, that they did not live this life that they're the center of our world. It's very unhealthy. I think the healthiest things that a parent can do is go on dates and for kids to see that their relationship with their mom is strong. There's actually a curriculum out there, I recommend it. It's called Growing Kids God's Way, and it talks about that. There's actual science that when kids see parents have a very healthy marriage and healthy in that too is even kids seeing parents reconcile differences, not everything being hidden behind the doors.
Right.
It actually builds confidence in kids. So, there's, like I said, there's multiple seasons of that, of being the wife, the mom, the daughter, and you just go in and out of that. But when your kids are young and when they're in the home, my main role was making sure my kids were totally equipped for everything they needed before they left the house.
So good, Mom.
Yeah. Hey, so you got me. You jumped ahead to one of my questions because obviously, since I know both your kids so well, there are some things that are exceptional about them. They're both very smart. I won't never tell you that again, G. But they're both very smart. They're both incredibly emotionally controlled, and they are so unselfish and humble, despite the accomplishments. That was one of the things that stuck out to me about Garrett. I was like, this guy's accomplished, an elite level that I've never met anybody else in my life. And I've seen guys that are like good hunters be more arrogant about their ability to shoot a deer under no threat than Garrett has been, about what he accomplished. And it just stood out to me, the humility. So I was going to ask you where that came from, but you started to touch on it because they both have such a desire. Both Britt and Garrett have such a desire to serve other people. And it's not contrived. It's not forced. It's like, no, this is, so you said your 3 things for success. If we could jump into that, I'd love that.
And this was developed a little bit later. I mean, we didn't have this thought when they were little, but
it evolved.
About
Then
teenagers.
there are some things that you do as a parent, looking back, and then as time passes, then you can put the statements that go with it. Then you can tie the bow tie around
that's just
it, right?
maturity. It's like the maturity of a business. You start out with a business like, let's just find a product we can sell.
Right.
Right.
And you grow and you develop.
You evolve into that.
Yeah.
So the number one thing that we knew that we had succeeded as parents is that when our kids became adults, that they chose God on their own. That they're, because it's not about serving mom's God, dad's God.
Yeah, that's good.
They have to figure that out on their own. They have to have their own buy-in. They've got to be in their own, discover and deploy that, develop all of that. It's very important, in that piece. The second thing is that as adults, their life wasn't about themselves. Mm-hmm. Their life was to give and to serve to other people and to bring other people on that journey with them, right? So that was the second. And the third, it's a little selfish here, but I'm just going to say it, was that they choose us back. Yeah. That we knew that if our kids wanted to continue to do life with us, that we had parented well. Because we see a lot of relationships that kids, once they go off to college, they don't want to come home and spend time with their family because there was never a relationship that was ever established. So that was really important to us. So those were our 3 things that...
I want to ask you guys how you did number 3. Like I know, but I want to ask you for the audience. But I also want to put some clarification with that. Not only is it just one of the hardest to accomplish, but it requires faith. Because for my parents said that they would choose us back. Now you can put your kids in an environment where whatever they're going to be with you. They need to spend time with you. You provide for them, whatever it is. But it's one of the hardest things. And I really, in all of the 3 things that they just listed, there's a faith element to it. Mm-hmm. That our children would choose God. Not how do we railroad them into choosing God. And my parents did my dad talks about this all the time. Like they didn't give us a choice to go to church.
We put you in the environment.
Yeah, you're coming to church. Really what they meant is like, when Garrett's 19, when Garrett's 20, when Garrett's off on his own, that they did everything right, that now when the seed is planted, he would choose. And the same thing with the last about us wanting to be with them. It's ultimately, I think it's the hardest part of parenting. When I look at the way my parents have lived their lives and what I know is in front of me, is that you have to take the seed and you have to put it in the ground. And I think that's where so many parents get afraid, is like at the end of the day, again, like I said, God is a plan for their life. You have to plant the seed and say, okay, God, now you do your part.
Yeah.
And that's a scary one in all of those categories, but especially for your children choosing you back, because essentially at some point you're going to say, well, you go do whatever you want. And I hope what you want to do is to be with me.
Yeah, I
Which
think
is essentially what God does with us
Well,
as well.
100% it is. Yeah, he gives us free will.
I don't want to say that we're, great chess players or strategic mastermind with our children.
Both
but,
your kids are very strategic.
but planting seeds along the way and deciding now at my age, when you get over 60, you really start to think about legacy and more than you do in the past. And you've heard me say, everything that I do now is for the sole purpose of creating legacy in our family. So that sounds great now because we've accomplished some of those goals. But
Right.
early on, you have to give your kids something that's followable.
Yeah,
so if you
so
don't
good.
give your kids something that's followable, or you're not setting an example that they would want to be with you, then your kids are not going to be with you. I've heard kids say, "Well, I just can't wait to get out of the house." As far as I know, neither one of our children ever said that. We
did that
encouraged
pretty
them to get
quickly,
out
though.
of the house and go to school. In Garrett's case, go to the military. But
Because both of us were out of the house at 19.
yeah, you were off. And so, but they came back often. We went and saw them in their location often. I stayed plugged in with Garrett through the tough times of going through SEAL training. I was there. We went together, but I went by myself many times just to spend the weekend with him. And so if you give your kids, as I always say before, it's about being consistent. So you do things consistently. We consistently were plugged into the house of God, period. We consistently serve people. Our kids participated in that. We so underestimate our children. It's one of my biggest frustrations when I watch parents with their children. At 12 or 13 years old, kids are capable of running a business.
Yeah.
They're capable of being very responsible for their siblings, for their surroundings. And we treated our kids that way. We put responsibility on them. They were responsible for their surroundings and their room, and
They
the
didn't get
things they
paid
did.
for it either.
And there wasn't money attached to it.
The money was only attached if there were extra things,
Yeah.
And the extra things that they did get paid for is if they read books,
Read
and they
books.
would give me a report on it, then I would pay them.
Dr. Robbie, I'm going to say the same thing you did.
Yeah.
Dr. Robbie talked about parenting 3 years into the future.
Yes.
Right? Like parent your kids at 10 the way you want them to be at 13.
Well,
and the same with you, Pop, on, I was very capable at 12 and 13, but that's because not at 12 and 13, you said like, all right, son, you're a man now. You better figure it out, quit being a dummy. It's because at a young age, you started preparing and training.
Yeah, started early. And yes, your kids are going to fail. And yes, it's going to be frustrating. But I think if we did anything, one, we were very consistent. We gave them something that was followable. Not that they would be doing exactly what we do, but that they would follow the Lord the way we did, that they would serve the way we did. And it was a dream for us to be able to do life together. I've never agreed with a child leaving the house and going and creating their own foundation. There's great examples in the Bible of generations of wealth being created. And I just always had this thought, why would I want my kids to go out and recreate the wheel?
Yeah.
We do their own thing. How about we just build it as a family?
Yeah.
How about our kids build on top of our foundation, and then when their kids come along, they can build on top of this gigantic foundation that now 2 generations have created, or 3 generations. Now, that takes a lot of time together. That takes us growing as a family and communicating well as a family and a lot of those things. But one of the things I don't want to make sure gets missed in this, it's not just about process. Darlene had a great vision for how she was going to raise the kids. But the bottom line is the secret sauce to all that, and I've said this many times, is we loved our kids no matter what the case was, right? They always felt loved. So you can discipline a child very strongly if they know they're loved.
Yeah.
You can point them in the right direction if they know that you love them, and even if they fail, that you're going to be there. So that's the secret sauce. Our children, if you ask them about their childhood, we can tell you the misses. They can't tell you the misses.
You're right.
They don't remember any of them. And well, why is that? Because they felt loved and they were secure. So when Darlene and I made mistakes, which we did, we've forgotten most of them on purpose probably, but we had some blunders along the way. Our kids can't even tell you what those are. And that's because they felt love. We always express love.
Love
now,
covers all.
It does. Now, the difference is there's a stage in life that you are the parent,
Right.
period. That's the first priority. Now, if you are a good parent and you parent when it's necessary during the tough times, teenage years are the most difficult season, in my opinion. When they're little and they can't do anything and you have to do everything, that's challenging. But when they start trying to reason against you and don't agree with what you're saying,
And hormones are raging.
Hormones are raging. That's the most difficult season. So if you can remain consistent during that time frame, then when they get to college age, there's times where you're just friends.
Right.
Garrett and I, as he got through high school, we would go hunting together, and there wasn't any discipline in that. There wasn't any. It was just time together.
Yeah.
We enjoyed our time together. I wasn't getting on to him about anything, you know. We developed a friendship, but he always knew that I was dad, and I wasn't his buddy.
Right.
And specifically, Brittany would tell you, because she went through a very difficult time when she was a teenager. It was those a couple of years where we wanted to choke her out, and we're close to it, and had to be. You know, I'm sympathetic to people that go through very strong-willed children. I have two very strong-willed children.
No.
And Brittany was way more difficult than Garrett. He learned from her mistakes, which was smart on his part.
A wise man learns from his mistakes.
And
A wiser man
He
learns
wasn't
from the
smug about it at
mistakes
all.
of
No.
others.
Yeah, he's
No, he
always,
did.
always very humble.
And but you know, Brittany, we had to just strongly love her through it. And Brittany says, and she's a doctor now, and she deals with people's lives. She said, if my mother hadn't parented me when I needed her as a parent, not as a friend, I probably wouldn't be here today.
Wow.
Well, and
That's a strong statement.
She also says if I didn't parent her then, we wouldn't be able to be friends now.
Right.
We're able to be friends now because I didn't try to be her best friend then.
I give other people some wisdom out of what I saw you guys do there, where, you know, I think it was Brittany's sophomore year, junior year, where she was at Denison High School and struggling and making poor choices. And that was a short season. And you guys just said, to heck with all of that. We're taking away your car. We're ripping you out of school. We're moving, right? Like my parents, just like my mom's mission, it was their priority to raise us well. My parents weren't like, well, you know, we like living here.
Right.
And, you know, it's be inconvenient for us to make some changes. No, my parents made like aggressive moves. Your life's going in the wrong direction. We're about to rip everything out and start over.
And and just to finish that story, you moved to Frisco at that point, right?
Yeah, we had wanted to move to Frisco, but it was an economic time. It was very difficult. The economy had crashed. Homes were not selling. Our house had been on the market for I think 2 or 3 years at that time.
Oh, wow.
No offers, and we just said heck with it. We just moved, and it was actually 2 more years before the house sold.
Wow.
But it was a critical moment in Brittany's life, and we said we have got to change her environment, and we took her out, put her in a Christian school. She actually stayed with while we were making the move. She actually stayed with Pastors Keith and Sheila in their home for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, something like that, while we were making the transition. And you know, you do what you have to do, and it's not about convenience. It's just not. If you want to raise good kids, then it's gonna take effort, and sometimes it's gonna take a major sacrifice. Anytime you bring a child into the world, especially now with the cost of things, you have just put a major sacrifice in your life. You have multiple children. Garrett and Lindsay have multiple children and plan on having a large family, which as grandparents is awesome.
Yeah.
We love that, but it's a responsibility.
Yeah.
And every child that hits the ground running, you have got time and talent and your treasure that's going to have to be poured into them if they're going to win.
Yeah.
And that's not a negative. It's the most wonderful thing in the world. I'd say it all the time. Darlene and I are the richest people on the planet. Now, we've had some success in life financially, and we've been blessed and been able to do a lot of things. But our kids went through a horrible, difficult time with us when I lost everything. I made some bad decisions. I tried to take a company public and lost everything, had to file bankruptcy. And they saw us walk through that together as a family. And so, it's just, if you'll do it and you'll pay the price, I just can't imagine our life. Our kids, we live within a mile of each other. You know, if the kids were a little older, they could walk to our house.
Yeah.
You know, we do everything together. We look forward to holidays.
Yeah,
you know,
I
when
love
people
that.
just talk about, I got to get together with my family. No, we're like, oh, great, we're going to all be together. You know, Christmas is a wonderful time. Easter is fabulous. You know, it's an amazing season where we love being together. We're doing life together. We're creating companies together. It's what's possible. But if we hadn't have done what we did in the early years, when it wasn't so much fun and you see the rewards of it, then we wouldn't have that. Our kids would be off. Garrett could have very easily went off, decided to stay in, go to Green Team, be on SEAL Team 6, been in then 13 or 14 years and said, you know, I'm going to stay 6 more and get my 20, and, you know, lived on the coast and not had a life together. But he made a strategic decision. I need to come home. I need to get involved in what's going on at the church. I've got a mission to accomplish. Brittany, as soon as she could, they started their marriage in Houston. They both knew that wasn't where they needed to be, and they moved home.
Yeah.
And it was tough on them to make that transition. But you know, you're going to make sacrifices for your kids, and then in their case, they both made sacrifices to come back and be here with us.
But isn't it funny? And I'm saying this for people that maybe didn't pick up on it. They basically modeled what they saw you do, because you said you had a house. How many people would be like, oh man, our kid's in trouble? And Garrett pointed it out. Well, our house isn't really going to sell. What are we going to do for a job? Maybe we'll ride out. We know we need to get her out of here, but this needs to happen first.
It's not a good time.
Right. Yeah. It's not convenient. You said, no, you had your priorities straight. And you said, we're going to do this whatever the cost. And you made it happen. So, I mean, and then the same thing. You took Garrett with you everywhere. He tells stories about how when he was 5 or 6, he'd be on construction site. People are like, what's he doing here? Like, it's my son. I'm bringing him with me. And like, think about that price of inconvenience, but also you know, you're known as Mr. Consistent. That's what your kids call you, and that's like the first word that comes to mind when you think of you. Like, is it a high price? Yeah, but I mean, is it worth it? We're getting to see what happens when you walk it out, and I hope it's encouraging to people. Like, it's not easy, but if you have your priorities and you're willing to actually endure and pay the price and have that vision, man. You said you're the richest guy on earth, and for people that didn't know this, when Scott's talking about going bankrupt, it wasn't like you lost, you know, your $100,000. You had a Ferrari, you had a boat, like you were.
It was millions.
Yeah, you were rolling. And the thing that's interesting is talking to both your kids. They say that was a time that like leveled you up in their eyes. Like Garrett said before, you guys might be different if that hadn't happened, but you got to watch your parents be consistent. And you didn't know that when you're paying a price, but for any parent out there, when difficulty comes, it's not just about how you get through it or how you get rid of the pain or how you solve the problem. It's like, what manner are you going to carry yourself through with it? Because guess who's watching? Your kids.
Struggle well in front of your kids.
Yeah. Difficulty is coming.
Yeah.
In some form or another, because it's just life, and we're going to have challenges. So, you know, it's
We were always very transparent with our kids.
very.
Going through the things we were going through, and you know,
You guys didn't pretend.
no, and you know, our thing too is we just really felt like it's good for them to see that. Like I said before, it's important for them to see how you're resolving conflict and doing all of those things, and you know, and life is life. Listen, we're not perfect. People make mistakes. Like I said, kids are going to make mistakes. Adults make mistakes. The biggest thing, like even with our kids, when they would make mistakes, you know, they would do things. We never call them names or call that out. What we did was we called up who they were. This is who you are as an Unclebach, right? We would call those things out. So shame, again, I am a no shame girl. That is just one of the biggest arrows that the enemy uses against us is shame.
Very good.
So like that was we never put that on our kids, so they didn't have to carry baggage like that around. So in the same deal of what we were going through too, it's like, you know what? Listen, you know, our philosophy in life was we can do anything for a day. We can do anything for a week. We can do anything for a month. We got this. We're pushing through. And, you know, we were a no-quit family.
Yeah.
I would tell you, that was probably one of the little things that we instilled in our kids, even, it's kind of a squirrel trail.
No, it's a
but
good one.
that we instilled in our kids at a very early age, like even with sports, we didn't allow our kids to play like 5 sports, you know, because the most important thing would be that we have dinner as a family. You know, that was back in the day where families had dinners together more,
Yeah.
and you don't see that as much. But the biggest thing was like when they would choose a sport, we would tell them whatever that is, you better decide that that's what you want to do, because your team's counting on you, so you
Yeah.
can't quit.
Yeah.
So even if you decide you don't like it, you will finish that out till it's done, because this isn't about you, it's about team, and we don't quit. So we kind of had this no quit philosophy, and
That was hard on Mom occasionally when you have a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old and it's 35 degrees outside and sleeting.
I remember
And
that.
the public sports authority decides, this is a great day to play soccer with small children.
Yeah, it was Garrett's last game of the season. He was 4 years old. It was soccer, and I had to bring the snacks, so definitely we have to show up. So we're there, and it's that deal. It's integrity. It's our word. We said we were going to do it. Integrity is a big deal. So we show up. Bless his heart. It was like his little toboggan was frozen solid. He couldn't quit shaking. I had to put him in the bathtub for 2 hours. He was trying to warm up, but by gosh, we finished the season, didn't we?
Little did you know you were training a future SEAL. You're not allowed to quit. You're going to shiver a lot. You guys, no wonder you passed twice. It wasn't your first time. Yeah.
I want to back up to something my dad was saying about legacy. That everything in his life, he feels like he's putting into our family and putting into the future for a point of legacy. And I think there's a lot of people. It's an unfortunate reflection of where our society is, but a lot of people are in my dad's shoes.
Right.
I don't meet as many people that are in my shoes that they come from, parents who started off and
for sure.
really, really laid a foundation. So there's a lot of people that I think more people will connect with my parents than they will with me of where they are in this story. And I want to just give some encouragement. It's like, man, how do I do that? Like, what's the key? What's the foundations? Question people are always asking, like, what's the secret? What do I really need to do? Well, Christ said, he who seeks to gain his life will lose it. It is one of the principles of the life that God has given us. And that same principle that goes with salvation, right? He who seeks to gain his life will lose it. But if you'll give your life, if you'll sacrifice your life, you'll get it back. Well, my parents, are saying like, hey, we decided it's not about us.
Yeah.
We're gonna serve. We're gonna do things that aren't for us. We're gonna do things that are for the future. And look what kind of life they have now as the benefit of it. So really all it takes to make that shift into like greatness parenting instead of survival parenting is you decide that it's not about you. And what the same thing's going to happen in my life where I'm a great beneficiary of everything my parents have done for me. And there's a lot of great rewards I'm going to have. I'll turn around and end up doing the same thing for my kids. My kids are going to get to, sit under the trees that I planted that I never benefit from.
Yeah.
And I'll get one day, my parents have painted that picture for me. One day I'll sit in shoes like theirs. I'll sit in a seat like theirs where it's like, man, I get to see my children benefit from this. So really where it all starts, where great parenting starts, where a legacy starts, where following God starts, is you decide to not be selfish and make your life about something greater than yourself.
Yeah. So good.
Yeah, I'd add to that too, because so you're listening to this podcast and you have small kids. Great. Start early, right?
Yeah.
But say you're listening and you're our age and you've got kids that you're divorced or you had 2 marriages and the kids are, we're not raised together and whatever. And I have this conversation with a lot of people. Start today.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of life left to lead. You can repair those broken relationships with your children. Start calling them, start sending them letters, be consistent, do the same thing that you should have been doing all along. And in a couple years from now, probably not tomorrow, but in a couple years from now or 4 or 5 years from now, you can restore relationships. You can restore a broken relationship with your kids. You can begin to create legacy. It's never too late to start. The principles of God are true. It doesn't matter if you start when they're 1 or if they're 35. They are true. If you love them, if you have discipline in your own life and consistency in your own life, your kids will follow you at some point.
Yeah.
So I always just tell people, it doesn't matter where you're at on the journey. Start parenting well today.
Yeah, I love that, Pops. That's because so many people are in that retro parenting phase where they have to they're trying to fix things that they weren't aware of.
I think what Dr. Robbie said is true for little kids, true for big kids. It's true for all of parenting, whatever season and phase you're in. Parent for 3 years into the future. That's really just the beginning. Parent for 5, parent for 10 years into the future.
Well, I always look at it as, when you guys were little, that I wasn't parenting a kid, I was parenting a future adult.
Yeah.
And so my thought process is, well, this might be cute right now, what he's
Right.
doing, but that's not going to be cute later. So we need to adjust that right now.
Yeah, no, that's good. What's amazing about this is I had multiple questions, and you guys have kind of organically answered most of them. But one thing that I want to touch on, because I get the privilege of getting to be around you guys at a much closer level than most people, and so I'm trying my best to just pull some of the greatness and some of the things that I've heard Garrett and Brittany say about y'all, just that that highlight to them. You guys had this thing that you would say, and Dr. Robbie touched on about how important it is to get identity. That's not what Unclebachs do. Where did that thought process come from, and like, how did you guys decide, hey, this is going to be a thing in our parenting?
I'd like to tell you it was some great book I read or something like that. I really think it was, I was always confident. And, I think I just carried that into our family that, look, this is how we're going to be. And regardless of what other people are doing or not doing, we're going to be strong in who we are.
Yeah.
And that was obviously centered in the God focus of Christ being first in our life. But I just thought, we can be excellent. I've always tried to be excellent. And it's a thought process I've had. And then Darlene, extremely disciplined person, and she didn't have the encouragement around her. It fed me a little bit different than her. Darlene, when I first met her, was very quiet, very introspective, but she was very disciplined. She was working out in gyms back when there were no gyms. All there was barbells and muscle up guys. She was taking vitamins,
Were you
and
jacked
protein, and she was.
Yeah.
And doing things that most people weren't doing. So she had a core value of excellence. So
Yeah.
when we got married, that just transferred into our life and then to our kids. And when our kids started coming up, we had already made decisions of how we were going to be,
Yeah.
and what we were striving to accomplish. And so it just rolled out with our kids and said, hey, this is what we do. And you're an Unclebach. We don't do those things.
Yeah.
And I think it just established a foundation of thinking. And then we modeled it, of course, not on purpose, but that's just who we were. So our life reflected what we were saying. We weren't saying do
Yes.
this and then not doing it.
Yeah.
Do what I say, not what I do, does not work. It never has. It never will. And so that's what it came out of. And
Well, I think some of it came from like a growth mindset too, because we were always like, we would go to marriage seminars all the time. We were always reading books. If we were on a road trip, I'm reading a book to him, and we're reading together. And, we would do that a lot. It was always self-improvement and, trying to grow and be better and those kind of things. And just in that, like, this is who an Unclebach is. I look at it like, all of our DNA, we have a different DNA, right? Well, I also look at like family marriages, they have their own DNA. So although there's going to be certain principles that we're going to model that we see in other people, and obviously, reflecting what God says, the methods may be a little different because our DNA and the imprint that we're supposed to leave in this world is going to look a little different than somebody else because we've been called to something different. So that's kind of where that came from. And that's who, we just, in our discovery, you'll hear Pastor Keith a lot talk about discover, develop, and deploy.
Yes.
So in our discovery of, it's one thing we knew who we were in Christ. Now we're having to discover who we are in our marriage, who are we as parents and all of that, developing it and deploying it. And again, principles are very much the same that, like if you look at, Pastor Keith and Sheila, that they'll have some of those same principles. Their methods might be different, our methods, but because we kind of have our own unique DNA. And that's why I always tell people, don't compare yourself to other people's marriages and those kind of things. Look at some of the character stuff that you like, and you can model that. But that you have a specific DNA that God's put in you, and go discover that and develop it.
Yeah.
well, when you have core values, and we talk about that now, but back then I don't even think that was the word. It was more family values or our strong principles that we core values is somewhat of a modern term, or at least
Yeah.
in the last 20 years.
We were big on honor.
Mm.
Honor was a real big deal with our kids. Respect. I mean, as a matter of fact, I can remember.
Attitude.
Here's a funny story. I can remember Garrett being in high school, and he's in this class, and I'm seeing his grades are kind of like I'm not like liking the way these are looking. So I had an appointment with the teacher, have a talk with him, and I'm going like, hey, like if he's not doing what he's supposed to, like, let me know, like I'm on him, and no problem. Well, as a matter of fact, there is one thing. If you could have him quit saying yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, and yes, sir, and no, sir, because it just gets that class all aggravated, and it's just too much handle. At that point, I stood up and I said, sorry, not going to change that. It's a core value in our family, and you're going to need to learn how to handle that in your class, and turn around and walk
It was
off.
actually a weak male.
Yes. Passivity. Sorry.
I love you
Not
guys.
my
Man.
fave.
No, I just, but see, okay, so if you're listening to this, because everybody wants the microwave great kids, right? Like, how do I have great kids but not have to be that hard? What I'm getting from you guys, and Dr. Robbie said this so much about how you have to back up and model what you do. It's shocking, but if you have better ingredients, you come out with a better end product. And like the need for self-leadership, what you're saying with the growth mindset, with pushing yourself to be better, what you're saying, Pops, about understanding that you saw that in her and you were attracted to her, and you were very consistent. You knew you need to model, and you in many ways were a force of saying, this is who we're going to be.
Yeah.
And like you guys, so I think we probably want to finish up here, but this is one thing I want to make sure to give people practicals, because I get to see inside your family that in a way that other people don't. So, and this is where I'm heading with this. So much times you'll hear the term patriarchy, and especially in today's, I'll just say, confused society, that can be displayed as such a negative thing. Like, this patriarchy is trying to hold us down. By the way, don't ever see the movie Barbie, because it was awful. I watched it on a plane, and they just murder this concept of how it's like, oh, it's all these men trying to get things to work for themselves. But in your family, I see a possible patriarchy in a way that every person in it is thriving and is being led forward in a way that's serving and loving and growing. And so I want to get into some of the practicals of how you guys do the administration of family, because you guys have like a radical accountability. Like you said, you've always been open, and you still do. And that includes everything with, as they're adults, sex, finance. You guys don't, it's not like, oh, we don't talk about that.
Yeah.
You talk about everything. You have family meetings. You write letters to people, Pops. I've been there for when, and you read them. Can y'all share some of the practicals of how you administrate your family, just for people who want to have like that structure?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's a biblical structure that our family is run by. It's always been that way. As the head of the household, I'm responsible, and the Word of God is very clear about that. And so I carry the weight and a mantle of what's my family becoming, right? Well, Darlene understands that and agrees with it, and she also knows her role as my wife and support, because we're together, and we do it together. So when that started, I think we, I don't want to say we backed into it, but we started with open communication with our kids, and we were always very, very clear with them, right? And so we had lots of discussion, even though they didn't want to have the discussion. We added the values proposition to our family very early. We started telling our kids when they were 4 or 5 years old, what are you bringing to the family? This is, our kids understood that it was our house, not their house. It was our clothes that they were wearing.
Yeah.
It was the food that we bought that they were eating. And so, not that that's meant to be bad, it's just awareness.
Yeah.
And so they could understand the value of the benefit of living in our household, right? So we got the concept of the family meetings from Keith and Sheila, and they did that. Oh, that's a great idea. And so we started having family meetings with our kids where they were children.
Right.
And they're very lighthearted, but we covered topics and things that were going on in their life and things that needed to change, and we were open with it. And sometimes it was directed at Brittany, and sometimes it was directed at Garrett, and sometimes it was directed at either one of them.
Right.
We were just having
we had family meetings when you told us, about the stuff in your business. We had family meetings about, the stuff with Brittany. Like, it was really just like, hey, let's all get on the same page.
So you just get it out in the open. And are there any rules, like anybody can speak, or what are the rules?
Yeah. Well, there's no yelling and things like that going on, but yes, it was open. And we created a very trustful, open relationship, and we've still got it today with our kids. They're very They come to us to talk about life and where they're going and at least get our opinion. They don't always take it.
Yeah.
But
And these have evolved into our bonus kids being part of the meetings too. And it's come to a place now where it may be a little while before we've had a meeting, and one of our bonus kids will be on our little fam chat going, "Hey, when's the next meeting?"
Right.
You know, so
I think
So
one of the
catch-
things my parents did I think that encouraged my sister and I to think, to understand why we did some of the things that we did. There were times where my parents would say, this is not open for negotiation. Like, hey, this is
Right.
what we're doing. And then there were other times where they wouldn't say that. And so we would assume that maybe we could. And our parents would hear us out, let us make a request, make a justification for what we're trying to do. And there were times where, if, Brittany or I could come up with a good explanation of what we're thinking, why we're doing what we're doing, that our parents would say, all right, that was in like the teenage and late teenage years. It's like,
yeah, we'd
well,
actually
They
say, well,
both could have been-
sell us on it.
they both could have been part-time attorneys. Let me tell you.
Oh, I believe that. Yeah. Okay, good. And for those of you that missed it, the family chat. Obviously, you guys have a thread that's just for your family members that y'all just, and it's not always serious stuff. It's funny stuff. It's just to communicate.
Well, I want to add to that now that they're adults, and this should be happening when they're kids and teenagers. We've never not had transparency. So now on our phones, everybody follows everybody.
Yeah.
I know where everybody is if I want to look. I don't worry about it too often unless we can't find them
Or they're late for dinner.
or they're late.
saves a lot of where are you texts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also a trust, right? We
Right.
trust each other, and we're not doing behavioral things. They're not going to find me with my truck parked out in front of a strip
Right.
club. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And but there's one way to make sure it doesn't happen is be accountable to everybody in
Right.
your life, right? And then you won't make poor decisions. But so accountability was important. Negotiation, there weren't absolutes. There were absolutes, but not everything was absolute. And when things were difficult and poor decisions were made, we talked about it and worked through it. Discipline was swift generally and talked about. One of the things with our children, I handled the discipline with our kids most of the time. If I wasn't in town, Darlene would obviously handle it. But, I talked to our children. I talked to Garrett, talked to Brittany. We would pray together. They knew why they were getting disciplined. And we'd already talked about it and prayed about it, and they were disciplined.
You spank them.
It depends.
Right.
When they were younger, absolutely. Spankings, this whole deal about not spanking your kids is the most stupid, ridiculous. I could teach about an hour on that, but
The
just
Bible
do what
says
the
you,
Word of God
you hate
says.
your children if you don't.
That's what it
spank them.
says.
Yeah.
But so yes, we discipline our children, but as they got older, when they get into their teenage years, there's different things. Spanking is not necessarily relevant at that point.
Right.
And so other things become more important and more things that. And nowadays, the phone is the number one discipline for kids. It's I could have a whole different thought about that. I won't get in that today. It's a parenting discussion. It's a very difficult season. It's a very time in life where people have a lot of decisions to make with their children. Social media is not all good. As a matter of fact, it's predominantly bad.
Yeah.
And so that's a whole nother issue. But we dealt with all those things. When our kids got phones, we told them, said, you have a phone for one reason, so I can reach you. The first time I can't reach you, you will no longer have a phone. And back then we didn't have tracking devices,
Right.
but they got to a point where they could have the little flip phones.
Right.
Social media and internet wasn't on phones back in those days. And so it was just simple things like that. But yes, we have I'm the patriarch of the family, the matriarch of the family sitting across, and our kids understand that and respect that.
Yeah.
And it's happening in their families the same way. But it all happens under a huge blanket of love, and encouragement and positivity.
It's easy
Yeah,
to
I wanna
submit
speak to that.
It's easy to submit to parents who want the best for you.
Yeah, and I want to speak to that too, as he's saying he is the matriarch, and yes, absolutely, I'm submitted to him. I know that for a lot of women, submit is like a bad word.
Not on this podcast.
And personally, I will just tell you, to be submitted is actually very freeing.
Yes.
It's very freeing. We have we have a lot of trust. There's a lot of conversation that takes place. It's not like it's just my way or the highway. It's not like that at all. We're very one in our decisions and things that we make. But we'll have discussion about it. And what makes me feel good is I know he listens to my voice, right? And I weigh my voice very carefully, because there's sometimes when I have to weigh, okay, Is this just my emotional feeling? Is this something that I feel like I need to share? Is this something that I need to hold on to and pray about? So I weigh that very heavy because I know my voice is heavy. So I try not to bring anything to him unless like I feel like it's something I need to bring to him. But we'll have a discussion and we can even have a different thought about it. You know, we might not necessarily see it the same way, but at the end of the day, and he's going, okay, this is what we're going to do. I'm like, okay, I'm completely okay with that. Because honestly, it's like, I really, you know, it's like, I feel another part of my role is to pray for him. It's very important because the weight that a man carries is way heavier than what a woman carries. And so it's very freeing to submit.
Dr. Robbie said it so well, and I never thought about this because we think of submission in terms of like UFC. Like he overpowered her and she submitted, right? That's what we see. But he said that what's a submarine do? It goes underneath. And what does submission? It means you come under the mission, which is what y'all said. When you have a shared mission, why would you sit there and fight the person? If Garrett and I are going to conquer a mountain and we go halfway up and I'm like, Garrett, you know, I don't really like the way you're doing this. I'm just going to bail. It's stupid. Why would you fight the person that's on your team? Yeah. And that's when submission is wonderful because it's like, great, we're both under the mission. This is what we're doing. We've got roles. Great. Let's roll.
Communication plays a big part in that.
Yeah, I'll say that in our 40-year marriage, there hasn't been that many times where the decision I've made is a standalone decision.
Right.
We talk through it. We try to gain agreement. Sometimes there's tough decisions to be made, and a woman's not going to feel comfortable making that tough decision, and the guy has to make the call.
Yeah.
And it usually has to do with your children.
Right.
And, you know, when they're, you know, off the rails. And so, but I would say 98, 99% of the time we've agreed on it. But a man has to be willing to make tough decisions.
Yeah.
And it's biblical. I mean, I can rest in that.
But I can trust him because he has, through our marriage, has always exhibited a reason for me to trust him.
Yeah, there you go. And that's the benefit of consistency. And just to say, because you were talking about discipline, Pop, something that you said to us very clearly in Mighty Men at one point, or maybe you said it just to me, is never in anger. Ever. And I just want to highlight that because you talk through how you would discipline praying, but I just think it's important to note that.
Garrett introduced a word to me that he got, I guess, during the Seals of Equanimity. I've prided myself on being in control of my emotions. Some of that was for business negotiations. Some of that was for sport, a desire to excel in sports and not lose focus on the things that you want to do.
Before I joined the military, I'd heard you say many times, you'll regret everything you say in anger.
Yeah. And so in the construction world, there's lots of volatile people. I've always prided myself on not being one of them.
Yeah.
And people will yell at me, and in a very short amount of time, they'll stop yelling because I'm not yelling back at them, and you can gain ground together. So with our children, I would tell them to go to their room so I could cool down.
Yeah.
I said, I'll be there in a few minutes. It was for my own self-governance.
It's also the anticipation of the pain.
You learned that early.
It also created that. But then I would come in completely calm and we would talk about what happened. And so they're going to agree with me, basically. This is what you did and why you're getting disciplined. Yes, I understand that I did something wrong. Well, let's pray about it. Then let's administer the discipline.
Yeah.
And so I never did it out of anger. And
well, and a lot of times while you're in the room, the part of the discipline process is trying to see if it was a hard issue. Because if it was a hard issue, it was a totally different discipline than like, you know, just being a knucklehead. Just being a knucklehead.
So I want to finish there, but like one of the things that your kids both say about you, and I really hope that y'all pick this up because you just said it without saying like you never lost your temper. Literally, both Garrett and Brittany will say, I can never remember my dad being angry. And ever since I've heard that from y'all, I decided in my family, I was like, I'm never going to, that's going to be me.
I was angry.
Oh, but I appreciate hearing you say that.
I've seen you be angry, but not like release your anger at me.
Right.
But I think that's an amazing thing. Now, what would you, and Pops, I'm going to give you one last thing, and this is going to be right up to you because I know the answer, but I want you to say it because it'll have a lot more authority. What would you say? Because like I made a decision to just be like, I'm going to follow what I've seen in you because I see the benefit in your kids. But what would you say for somebody that's like, well, I don't want to lose my temper, but you don't understand, I've got anger problems, or when they do this, or I can't help it. Like, how would you handle that?
Yeah, I won't be crass about it, but You know, I talk about the word decide a lot. And when I'm talking to guys, I say, you do pretty much everything you decide to do. So you decided you're going to watch college football all day Saturday, and that's what you're going to do. Or you decided you're going to go play golf instead of go to church. Mm-hmm. You decided that you were going to go out drinking with the guys. You decided that you were getting in a fight with somebody because they offended you. We do what, as men, we do whatever we decide. And if you sit and think about that just for a couple minutes, you'll go, yeah, I pretty much do everything that I want to do, whatever I've decided to do, even if it's against what your spouse wants you to do or whatever. So what I say to that is decide to control your temper. And it's not always easy. If you got to walk away, if you need to take a time out, if you need to figure out whatever your method is, but if you lose your temper, you lose. And that's in a fight, that's in relationship, that's in business negotiations, that's in just trying to get your hamburger at the place that the people can't seem to make your hamburger right. Was it really worth getting mad over and losing your it's just silly, right? So it really is, and it's I got this from Josh Kraft. I know he didn't create it, but he talks about it's simple. Doesn't mean it's easy, right? Simple but not easy. But controlling your temper is a discipline. Yeah. I have a very strong temper. And I always say there's a monster inside, but I control it. Right. And it's a decision to control it, and especially with your kids, and especially with your spouse. There just is no reason to be out of control. If it's a life or death situation, then here I'm coming on with full passion and full monster, you know. But the rest of the time, it's just a poor decision that you made. And so decide to be peaceful, decide to be rational, and start working on it. And it's amazing. After you have a short win, it's easier to do it the next time. Yep. And 5 or 6 wins down the road, you're no longer that guy that flies off the handle and screams and hollers at people driving down the street.
Yeah. Man, I love that so much. And that decide, I could go on about the decide message because I've heard you speak, and it was like truly a life changer for me. Gee, we're gonna wrap here, guys. That was amazing. I know I'm gonna listen to this multiple times. For everybody listening, go back and re-listen. There was so many practical things. I appreciate y'all giving us some of your frameworks and just the way you thought. And there's just a lot in here. So
can I say one thing?
Please. Yeah.
So we're extremely proud parents. Yeah. And it's worth the fight. I'm just telling you, you can have wonderful kids that'll bless you and want to be with you and give you grandchildren and create legacy. There's just some effort that it takes. There's some discipline. There's a price to pay. And all I can say, and I know Darlene would agree with me, it is worth every penny of effort and discipline and dollars that we spent. Right. It was worth it.
Well, it's like you were saying about the decide, it's the pre-decision of what you want that to look like. And again, get a picture for what you want your family to look like, what you want your kids to look like, the successes and watching them succeed, and decide this is how I want it to look. So then back up and start writing the story to get there.